if Russia were to attack directly a NATO member, particularly with one of these sort of experimental, newly developed, high-profile kinds of missiles, Putin doesn't know what the response would be. He has no idea. All bets would be off, and he can't guarantee, he can't rely on any sort of sense of restraint on the part of NATO members if such a line were crossed.
Let's talk then about Russia, because Vladimir Putin's face is on several front pages tomorrow morning. And Mr. Putin has said that Moscow fired an experimental ballistic missile into Ukraine. It was a response to Kiev's strikes in Russia using Western long-range missiles, including UK-supplied Storm Shadows. In a televised address, Mr. Putin warned that his military could now target the UK in response. Ukraine's Air Force had initially claimed Russia had fired a longer-range intercontinental ballistic missile to the Russian city of Dnipro earlier this morning. I think it was a Ukrainian city. I've been speaking to Dr. Jenny Mathers, a senior lecturer in international politics at Aberystwyth University, an expert on Russian politics and security, about the state of tensions between the West and Kiev tonight.
It's interesting that Putin has broken his silence and has decided to address the nation on this issue, because it's been several days since the Biden administration's decision, and also, of course, since Ukraine's first use of these longer-range weapons against Russia. And this is the first time we've heard of it. So that's one thing to point out, is Putin hasn't rushed to make a statement. Secondly, it's significant that he has explicitly tied the attack using these new experimental, newly developed missiles against Ukraine with a threat to follow up it with attacks directly on the states that are supplying Ukraine with these weapons that are hitting Russia, i.e. the US and Britain and other sort of NATO members. So that is definitely an escalation in Putin's rhetoric. It's a very explicit sort of a threat. And so it represents, an even bigger stand back sort of sign that he's putting up to the Western supporters of Ukraine. He's basically saying to them, this is dangerous. I really mean it this time. You had better back off and reconsider, or else there'll be consequences.
Given how frequently Vladimir Putin has saber-rattled and how often military analysts, including here in this country and the States, have said, I think we can now say he's bluffing, how much more seriously should we take him, given the language this time? We consider ourselves justified in using our weapons against military targets in those countries that allow their weapons to be used against our facilities.
Yes, so I think it is a step up in the rhetoric, but it is still at the level of we regard this as something that we have the right to do. He hasn't said, we'll be firing in 2 days, nothing like that. So it's definitely still in the area of issuing a warning, sending a signal, very clearly telling Western supporters of Ukraine that they had better back down. I think the thing to remember is that the power of these kinds of threats lie in the threats and not in the execution. Because if Russia were to attack directly a NATO member, particularly with one of these sort of experimental, newly developed, high-profile kinds of missiles, Putin doesn't know what the response would be. He has no idea. All bets would be off, and he can't guarantee, he can't rely on any sort of sense of restraint on the part of NATO members if such a line were crossed. So it would be extraordinarily foolish for him to do this, and it would potentially be catastrophic, and really sort of direct attention and resources of Russia away from the war in Ukraine and towards a totally different, vaster sort of a conflict. But making these threats has the potential to deter the West from taking further steps to support Ukraine. So this is the value. The value is in the rhetoric and in the threat. But if he actually takes that next step and presses the button, then we just don't know what sort of a situation we would be in, and he doesn't know either.
Yeah, and what should we read into the fact that the Kremlin informed Washington that it was going to launch this experimental intermediate range ballistic missile 30 minutes before they actually fired it at Ukraine.
Well, it's a bit of thumbing their nose at Washington, isn't it? I mean, it's giving them advance notice, but not very much. So there was clearly nothing that Washington could have done beyond pick up the phone and alert Kyiv that, this was coming. But it was a way of saying, again, reinforcing this message, another way of signaling, look, we're going to do this. It's going to happen in 30 minutes, to put the pressure on and to sort of say, yes, look, we're serious. You had better back off.
And it should be said that of these 9 projectiles that were launched at critical infrastructure in Dnipro this morning, 6 of them were destroyed by air defenses, and the other 3, it would appear, were not able to strike anything with major consequence. What do we think happens next then, if Ukraine responds with further long-range strikes inside Russia or inside enemy territory? Is there another scale that the Russians could upgrade to before a tactical nuclear weapon?
I think, again, using any sort of nuclear weapon by Russia would be also extraordinarily foolish, because not only would it not give them anything on the battlefield, but China, which is Russia's greatest supporter and on whom Russia depends a great deal, has made it really clear that they don't want to see Russia using nuclear weapons. Using nuclear weapons would be another crossing of a line where Russia just has no idea what the international response would be and where it would take it. So I think, Putin is very good at using rhetoric. He's very good at pushing buttons. He's very good at sort of molding a situation to his advantage. But, taking really extraordinarily reckless steps, that would be out of character.
And it should be noted, Jenny, that this is happening during the lame duck period, the final days of the Biden administration, in which he appears to be saying, okay, let's go for broke. All the things I could have given you over the last 2 years, I'm going to do it now. And Vladimir Putin knows that perhaps a much friendlier administration is coming in a couple of months' time. How significant is that?
Well, it's very significant because what Putin needs to do is to simply hold on to the territory that Russian forces have gained in Ukraine, and to do what they can to push the Ukrainians out of the territory that the Ukrainians are holding in Russia. In other words, to just keep inching along and to get in as advantageous position as possible by the 20th of January.
But perhaps not go much further than they've done today, because if he went much further, he doesn't know what Donald Trump's response might be.
That's true. I mean, Donald Trump is to some extent unpredictable. I mean, all of the signs that we've seen so far are that he would favor the Russian position. But nevertheless, he is known for doing things which are rather unpredictable. So he might veer in a different direction, even if only temporarily. So Putin can't know for certain what his response will be. But Putin also doesn't want to burn his bridges with the U.S. When there is, a change of administration happening, which he has a reasonable belief that it would be much more favorable to Russia, certainly, than the Biden administration has been.
That was Dr. Jenny Mathers, senior lecturer in international politics at Aberystwyth University and an expert on Russian politics and security.